Welcome everyone to Behind the Mystery. I am Lee Strauss, and this is Norm Strauss, my co-host. And at Behind the Mystery, we like to take a book. We're working through the Ginger Gold Mystery series right now, and visit the historical backdrop, what the interesting sort of tidbits are. And these books take place in the early 1920s, or at least the book that we're talking about today is the early 1924. It's Murder at the Mortuary, and we want to discuss the early forensics, which I think is for me was a very interesting topic. Before the 20s, the crime investigation, they had a really tough go, didn't they? Yeah. Like they didn't obviously rely on the techniques that we have now, but they didn't have anything. It was a very subjective way of going about trying to solve a crime, and not very effective. I think a lot of people got away with murder back in the day. For one thing, poisons were easy to access. You could get a lot, like arsenic and rat poisoning, you just get at the pharmacy. And there was no way to tell or prove, how a person had died. So that was one thing, but as they branched into the new decade, different forensic medicine or sciences started to take root. Like things like fingerprinting had been around for a while, but very rudimentary process. For instance, they had to have very, precise taking of the fingerprints with thick ink, and then it's called the Henry system, where they had all the cards in files, and so a person would have to go through the files and with a magnifying glass, people who were specialized in this would look for specific markings like the whorls and the arches and whatnot. And it was very painstaking and slow.
Yeah, when they took your fingerprints, they had to do if you've ever had your fingerprint taken, I have. Won't get into that. But back in the day, they had to do it really, really, so that you had to roll your finger back and forth very, very carefully, because the slightest difference would throw the whole thing off.
Yeah, it would smudge it or just make it impossible to read. So it was a very intense kind of situation. Even lifting prints was really difficult too, and they had to use fine brushes made with squirrel hair and stuff. And so the process of getting fingerprints back in those early days was really time consuming and not always precise. It was hard to get full prints. But that was in play in the late 1800s and into the 1920s, and also ballistics had started to take root, the science of recognizing that each bullet made its own markings and how to analyze those.
They're called striations. I looked this up.
Striations.
I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes.
But when the bullet spins as it leaves the barrel, and it can, and the barrel might have imperfections in it, and those markings will come in the bullet. So that back in those days, now this is like a real advanced science, but back in those days, it was just at the time of early 1920s, they were just starting to understand how you could actually match a bullet to the barrel.
Yeah, so this was very exciting news, because it would, somebody is being shot, you could say for sure what pistol that bullet came from. So obviously that helped narrow down the field a lot. Other things that were kind of new on the scene was toxology, like what we were talking about with poisons, where they were able to determine if a person was poisoned and also what kind of poison it was. So that was new science. Photography, just being able to take a especially in the 20s, mid-20s, like 1924, that's when the little Kodak cameras came out.
Yeah, so then, at that time, it was the first time that photographers would be on the scene.
Yes, because prior to that, it was like the big, thing with the blanket over your head, and everyone had to stand still. But now, photography had advanced where it could be operated by one person, and it was mobile, it was, compact, and you didn't need like the heavy slides or whatever. You had negatives and film. So that changed the way to preserve memory of a crime scene instead of just somebody's notes and relying on witness testimony. The photography, would be able to show the distance and all of that in black and white. So that was good. And another thing that was very new to the scene and took a lot longer, I think, to get established as a helpful science is the blood splatter.
Yeah, they weren't able to do blood, to examine the blood under a microscope in terms of the type of blood and chemicals and stuff, not like they can today. But they were able to start mapping blood splatters.
Yeah, so I think the idea was there. The idea that that the blood would tell a story. And then also just blood typing was fairly new on the scene. But it was there, and so they were able to, they could tell what type of blood maybe was at a crime scene, but not whose blood, obviously, because that was long before DNA.
So if we were to go back in time and attend a murder trial from 1900 or 1890 or whatever, or earlier, one of the things we would immediately realize is that a lot of the verdicts and a lot of the arguments were done just on almost anecdotal. It was a smooth talker could talk his way out of it, and it was far less subjective evidence.
It was more subjective.
More subjective.
With the forensic science, it became more objective. But so it was very easy to sway a court if you wanted to, like you say, if you were a smooth talker, or if you were a person of note or of prestige, if you were an aristocratic person.
Yeah, so once again, the class system. If you were upper class, you could get away with murder far easier.
Yeah, it held a lot. Your testimony held a lot of weight. The courts would be very, reticent to oppose what you had to say. And I think too, people, not to paint all of the wealthy and elite with the same brush. You just sometimes, your memory is not correct. You don't necessarily mean to misrepresent what you've seen or what you thought happened. But because you're the one saying it, and you're a lady or a lord or whatever, it just carried more weight than justice would acquire.
So the early 1920s are actually, some people termed it as, in murder trials, science over suspicion was the tagline. Because for the first time, forensics was, where the pathologist was a whole other witness to the crime. So physical evidence was far more suddenly a witness. So it wasn't just oral witness, it was hard objects.
And the 1920s saw, sort of for the first time, specialists in those fields being acknowledged and esteemed. So you had, instead of the generalist doctor or observer, you would have the pathologist, the forensic doctor, the person who had studied science or had studied these different forensic sciences that were budding. And your testimony as a person of expertise had weight because you could provide proof, right, to the courts.
And I was really curious about this, so I looked this up. Who was one of the first kind of pathologists that became well known in this field? Because back then, when you're bringing something new into a whole field, you become a celebrity, right? And so this guy in London, his name was Sir Bernard Spilsbury. And he was the first sort of celebrity pathologist. And at the time, his techniques would have seemed like science fiction, you know. But they were, as people started to hear them and what he was saying, they were making sense, and so it was irrefutable. And so I looked up what was the first kind of murder trial in London that really introduced and brought the whole area of pathology and forensics into the spotlight. And it's really interesting. There were several, but the one I'm going to read from my notes here because I didn't memorize it all, so forgive me. I don't usually like to do this, but I'm going to read a little bit from my notes instead
Go
of
ahead.
I didn't memorize it. So this case was in 1924, and it was called the Crumbles Mystery, and which is an odd name, but it was named after a specific bungalow by the sea in Eastbourne. Eastbourne is on the south coast of London, and not far from Dover. And so that's why it was called the Crumbles Mystery, because the murder took place in this bungalow, this rented bungalow. So it was about the crime was this guy named Patrick Mahone. He was a married man who was having an affair with a typist named Emily Kay. And in early 1924, Kay believed that Mahone was going to marry her. He had told her that I'm going to marry you and leave my wife.
Cad.
Yes, he was a bit of a cad, and he was apparently a real womanizer and a real smooth talker. And she had saved money. She had cashed in all her savings and different investments that she had done, and it was enough to scrape together, a fairly significant amount of money. And she had given him the money to prepare for their life together after he left his wife. The whole time he had no intention of leaving his wife, of course.
Age-old story.
So on April 12th, he asked her to meet him at a rented bungalow named in Eastbourne, near Eastbourne, known as the Officer's House or the Crumbles for some reason. So there he murdered her and dismembered her body and attempted to dispose of the remains. So, but what happened was his wife became suspicious, and actually, I read somewhere else that she actually came to the bungalow to spend a couple days with him just after he murdered this lady, Emily Kay. So she was in the place while parts of her body were still there.
Parts of the mistress's
and
body.
Somebody should write about this. This would make a great show. But Mahone's wife became suspicious when she found a left luggage ticket in his pocket.
And so she thought, where is he going?
And so she gave it to the police, who retrieved...
Why did she give it to the police? Like, if I found a luggage ticket in your pocket, would that be my first...
Well, this was after the fact. So this was a little bit after this lady, Emily Kay, went missing.
Okay.
So the police were kind of...
And the wife knew that her husband knew this girl.
I don't know about that,
maybe,
but she, well, possibly. But
she suspected something.
Yes. At any event, I'm not sure of all those details, but she found this ticket and became suspicious. So she gave the ticket to the police. They retrieved a bag from Waterloo Station, and inside they found a cook's knife, which had been was clean, a woman's blood-stained clothing, and part of a human body. That is gross.
That's gross, yes.
And so when confronted, Patrick Mahone claimed that Kay had died in an accidental fall during a struggle. He panicked. He said that he panicked and dismembered the body to move it. The police...
That's what I would do if I was in a panic.
So
you better watch out.
Yeah. So his whole argument was that she fell, hit her head on the side of a fireplace, and he panicked and dismembered the body to be able to move it easier.
Without being witnessed, maybe, too. Like, it's hard to haul a dead weight body, even if it's a small woman.
Yes.
And not have people go, hey, what you doing?
Yeah, so in the trial, that was his defense, that that she had fallen and that he panicked, so he didn't really murder her. So enter now into the picture this guy, Sir Spilsbury, and his brand new forensic toolkit. They called it that in the papers, a forensic toolkit. And he didn't just examine the obvious. One of the first things he did was he sifted through the fireplace and found a bunch of over 2,000 fragments of human bone in the fireplace.
That's a lot.
indicating that he had not just tried to dismember the body, he had tried to get rid of it completely at first, and that it was not done in a panic, that because it takes a long time to burn bones,
right,
to get rid of them. And so it proved that he had done it a lot more methodically than he claimed in court. So the Spilsbury guy very famously sifted through the ashes to find the bones. And then what he did was and this was new again, he analyzed the blood stain patterns in the room, and he drew maps of it and showed it to the jury and to the judge, and it showed the direction of blood splatter.
And why was this important?
Because this placed the violence in a separate room than where Mahone said it took place. He said she fell on the fireplace mantel, but the blood he actually killed her in a different room.
Did it also show like if she was dead or alive when she was killed?
That's the thing. Part of the blood analysis.
I mean, obviously when she was killed, she was alive. But I mean, did it show?
No, this was his argument.
When the blood happened, the blood splatters
yes,
happened.
that's part of the point. Is that it proved that she was that she was hit, and while she was still alive as the blood was being splattered out.
Right. So the heart was pumping, and so that has a different effect on the blood than if you're just dismembering and the blood would just leak out.
Yes, he called it something, an arterial splatter or something. But anyways, it proved that she didn't fall against the fireplace, that she was, and also he said that she hit her head on the fireplace mantel, and that's what killed her. Well, he examined the body and found that there was no such injury on the head as he described. Instead, he found different injuries, proving that she had been hit with a blunt instrument.
Right.
Another thing that he found was that he found a single piece of fabric fiber, so 2 pieces of fabric fiber on the body, on the remains, and it was the same fiber that came from Mahone's scarf.
Right.
So they matched under a microscope, a unique pattern of placing them together at a critical time. And then the other thing was, this was early, what they call entomology, because in the torso, Spilsbury found maggots.
Yeah.
And they were at a particular phase, these maggots, proving that the timeline that Mahone had put together for the accidental death, didn't match up.
Right.
It proved that he was lying in terms of the timeline of the death.
Can you explain why that is? Like,
Well, he said the death occurred at a certain moment.
Right.
And because of
and then he panicked and cleaned it up right away.
Yeah.
But it actually proved he spent more time in the cabin.
It proved that he was not in a panic, that he didn't try to do this all in a hurry. It proved that he did it over time. So it was the whole thing was premeditated.
Right.
So I mean, the main point of all this is that it was the first time that these types of things were brought into, and people were astounded.
It would be. I can imagine if you were a person who would, like to attend these sort of types of courtroom drama things, and suddenly this is the first time you've ever seen forensics medicine used as a means to convict somebody.
Before the police would have said, "There's the body, there's the blood on the wall."
Yeah.
They wouldn't go to mapping how the blood was spread across the wall and which direction it was, and which gets way more
or
scientific.
The timeline thing. They would just say, "Oh, okay, there's no way to prove that he wasn't in this cabin for longer unless somebody saw him or whatnot." But
it sounds really Sherlock Holmesy, right? Sifting through the fireplace for remains. The police didn't think to do that.
That little piece of paper that always stays in the fireplace with the pertinent clue on it that they pick out with pinchers.
That's right. I mean, you can imagine the police would never have thought probably to look through the fireplace.
Well, if you look at the fireplace and it just looks like ash and wood burned, you wouldn't right away come to the conclusion, well, maybe that's not wood, maybe it's bone, human bone.
Right.
So I think it created the opportunity now for all investigations to take a closer look at all the clues and to also search for clues that would normally have been overlooked.
One newspaper article said It marks the moment that the detective's magnifying glass was joined by the scientist's microscope, and that police work will be changed forever because of it.
Yes.
That was 1924.
Yeah, and I think too, like prior to that, and police a lot of times take a bad rap, but they, the good-hearted ones, which I am assuming there are more that are good than bad, they're there because they want to serve the people, they want to, serve and protect, and they want to make sure that justice happens when an injustice occurs. And so when you don't have the tools to do that, when you don't have science to back up your case, a lot of bad guys get away with
That's right, yeah.
murder and crimes, and so people would just blame the police, back in those days, because they're not doing their jobs, or they're not any good at their jobs, or what's the use of having them around. And they got a bit of a bad rap because they didn't have the tools they needed to actually accomplish the outcomes that the people wanted. So once forensic came on the scene, that really helped them out a lot to be able to do their jobs.
So once again, your books, Murder at the Mortuary, perfectly timed. It was the same year that groundbreaking case in forensics was.
Yes, yeah. I didn't know that, I don't think, when I wrote that. So, talking about Murder at the Mortuary, it wasn't a forensic specific book. I didn't go, oh, I'm going to write a book about forensics now. I think forensics takes place throughout the whole series, especially because Haley Higgins is a character. So every murder, there's some item of forensics that Haley and Ginger, maybe ahead of their time, witness and see, or are intuitive too. So, but the story in Murder at the Mortuary is actually about unregistered cadavers, because when the dead would get delivered to the mortuary, they came with a document. I think that's normal. And but in this story, bodies were showing up with empty envelopes, and they're like, well, what's happening with this body? And so then they, through the forensics, pathology, the autopsy, they would be able to determine what took place, how the person died. But what they couldn't figure out was where the person died. And then I brought in the trace evidence, which was also kind of a new thing back then, to look at the small, right? Not just the things that you can see necessarily with the human eye, or that you have to use a microscope or something, or you have a small amount of. So in my case, my characters, they were coming in, these cadavers, with dirt under their nails. So the question was, can you determine where this dirt came from? So these are things that early forensic science was able to do that they weren't able to do maybe a decade or two prior. And being able to isolate a region where a specific type of dirt is found, help them to find where the murders took place. So that was sort of the forensic material that I used in that book. But what I was able to do also with this, is to really get into how the mortuaries of the time, or the morgues, were set up, what kinds of instruments they had, and what their mortuaries looked like. And I think in reality, they weren't these sort of vast, bright, glamorous places that we, maybe see. And I've got to cut that part because I didn't talk about Murdoch Mysteries in this. So we would talk about, what the mortuary would look like, in these times. They're usually in the basement of a hospital. And so there's a lot of going down into steps and the dankness, and then you would have maybe a row of lights just above the ground if it's the basement. What was common too was not the stainless steel tables. They were like white ceramic usually, and electricity was new, so you would have your one, maybe your two bulbs that would go above the body or above the the desks of the doctors. And the refrigeration cupboards too were a fairly new thing. I think, prior to electricity, I don't know, they must have just used ice boxes like they did with the food, or they didn't hold on to the bodies long enough for them to decompose. So that limited their time frame where they were able to examine the bodies too. So that was one of the reasons why I brought Haley Higgins into Ginger Gould's world, is I wanted to be able to look at the forensics and have it come from, a female perspective. So that kind of covers what we're talking about here. The purpose for these podcasts is just to kind of draw the curtains a bit about the historical backdrop of the books that we are featuring each time. And just each one is different, and so we have something different to say. And if you're enjoying these podcasts, please let us know by pushing the like button and subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next one. I think the next one is Murder at Kensington Gardens. So it'll have a lot to do with crime around royalty, I guess. Yes, and make sure you check out the links in the descriptions for different things that we have on offer there. So
sounds good.
Yes, please, if you have questions or comments, let us know in the comment section. Did you learn something new? I think this episode sort of is a little bit of a touches on like a true crime podcast. Do you have something to add? We'd love to hear from you. So until next time, thanks a lot. Bye.